Hello, my name is Jimmy and I'm 30 years old. 6 months after being medically discharged from the Royal Navy and suffering with depression, anxiety and PTSD, I attempted to take my own life. I had reached a point where I didn't think I was going to get any better and I couldn't go on the way things were. Unfortunately, it's something I've heard from other veterans. You haven't responded well to the treatment or the various medications, you are therefore discharged. This is more to do with employment suitability rather than your likelihood to recover. But you don't differentiate between the two. You feel like you cannot be fixed. There were times over the last few years where I would have really benefited from hearing someone else's story told by them. There is a lot of help out there, but sometimes it isn't easy to find. The support net is designed to be used by those suffering with mental health problems themselves, but it's also for their friends, family, and colleagues who just want to find out more about what they can do to support them. In today's episode, you join us sitting on a balcony in Wandsworth, having come straight from training, discussing the impact exercise can have on your health. Okay, you ready?
Good to go, bro.
Glass of water. Okay, and we're off. A very warm welcome to the inaugural episode of the podcast from the Support Net, challenging misconceptions on mental health. My guest today is Justin HAST. Before we begin, could you please introduce yourself and state where you're from and what you do for a living?
Jimbo, it is honestly a huge pleasure to be doing this with you. It's the first podcast either of us have ever done, and I couldn't think of one that's more relevant and honestly more important to be sitting down and discussing. So thank you very much for having me on. Yeah, to answer your question, so I was born in South Africa. I came over here when I was 5 with my parents. We moved to Surrey, and then the last 8-9 years lived in southwest London in Putney. When it comes to work, I think when people ask me, the first thing that comes to mind is, oh, look, I'm actually not sure what the hell it is I do. I'm really still trying to figure that out. There's always been a huge entrepreneurial spark within me. So I do a lot of photography. I've got absolutely no formal training in doing that. Do a lot of writing. I do a bit of sort of presenting, both digital presenting for websites and for social, and also presenting in the physical sense. I host events at the brands that I work with, and I also do a bit of consulting as well. So there's probably 4 strands to what I offer. I work from home in Putney. I've been doing this for probably by myself for 3 years, but I've been working in the industry for probably now 5-6 years.
The reason that I invited Justin on, who I have to confess, we are actually old school friends, but the reason I wanted him on the podcast is because I wanted to demonstrate the help and support one person can give from a non-clinical, or at least a less traditional method for treatment of mental health. And in this instance, I'm talking about CrossFit. So Justin, what was it that made you think, I'll take Jimmy along to my box, which is what they call CrossFit gyms, and introduce him to CrossFit? Why was it that you took me along?
Oh, Jimmy, where do you start? We've been great friends for a long time, and a couple of months back when I first became aware that you had been suffering and had got to a point of sort of wondering whether you could continue, I think that's fair to say. I really I was taken back. I really was taken back, because in life often you don't think that these things are going to happen to you.
Were you surprised when I told you about my condition and what had happened to me?
Honestly, I was taken back, but I wasn't altogether surprised. Not because of the person that you are or the person that I know, but because I'm aware of how prevalent mental health issues are, particularly in men. My mindset was very, very clear. I stepped back. I still remember exactly where I was. I was driving down to Southampton with my girlfriend at the time, with Natalie, and
who still is your girlfriend?
Who's still my girlfriend? Yeah, she's we're currently sitting in her apartment overlooking London, and I still remember exactly where I was, and I remember getting the message from you. I was. It was a text message originally to say, can I send you something? And I thought, okay, well, what's this? And then I remember reading it and really becoming very still and very present in what was going on and reading it. And it was, it did shake me. Forgive me, that's a police car. So, I think I had certainly been exposed to a few others there probably, I can think of two others who we grew up with, two people who we grew up with who had shared similar difficulties with me in the past, and I was sad. I was also a little bit frustrated in myself, I think. A little bit, I turned it upon myself and I wondered whether I had done enough. I wondered whether I had reached out enough to you, whether I had been the friend that I thought I was to you. And I quickly moved from that space to thinking, what can I do? And all I know is the benefits of exercise and the benefits to the body, but really first and foremost the benefits to the mind of moving and challenging yourself. And so I quickly moved into that space of this is my priority now. Jimmy is my priority. I need to establish a way in which I can have an impact on this man's life, because I think of all the times that we've laughed over the years, that's pretty much all we've ever done is just piss ourselves laughing. And I think, what can I do for this guy? Because this is selfishly, this is not a laugh that I want to lose. This is a laugh I want to have around me moving forward. And also, what's helped me? I haven't got to a point where I haven't felt that I can continue, but I would be lying if I said that I myself hadn't had those times, particularly away from people when I'm by myself, those quieter times in life. So I have suffered in some respects. For sure I've suffered. And the one thing that's been a consistent saviour for me has been the ability to move.
To exercise.
The ability to sweat, the ability to continue to build my mental strength, robustness.
So there's a combination of the benefits that you knew exercise, an intense exercise could bring, and also because you wanted to introduce me into something that has helped you in the past.
I'm still surprised. I shouldn't be, because I've seen the benefits myself, but when we talk about it now, and I can see the benefits, it's had on you, and when you've been kind enough to express them to me, I'm still surprised by. I didn't expect this to happen. I didn't expect this type of response to take place. I didn't expect it to give so much. And one of the great quotes that I heard years ago from a podcast was, to get out of your head, you've got to get into your body. Mm-hmm. And I really believe that's true. Really, really believe that's true.
So perhaps then, for people that don't know, could you just very briefly explain what CrossFit is?
Sure. It's functional training. So every day you're not entirely sure what you're going to face. That might be running, lifting, carrying, throwing, climbing. It incorporates every element of, say, gymnastics, powerlifting, and in a short, high-intensity environment. I think that's fair to say. It has got negative connotations because some people see it as a bit of a cult.
Yep.
It's so addictive that
Yep.
you suddenly become evangelical, and I really want to be careful here not to become evangelical about it because it's not the God's message. But it's a great way to train every day really hard. So you walk out feeling like you've blown yourself out, you've got nothing left to give. And it's also a great community vibe. It's unlike many other gyms in the sense that you actually make friends. I always say, if you go into a public gym, you're up against each other. You look at particularly the alpha males. You walk into the rack, squat rack, and it's where are the 25s? Where's the 60 kg dumbbell? I need to get that above my head at least so I look the part. And no one's going to come and help me. And all I care about is that the other dude saw me lift it. And that's all I care about. The environment in a box is very different. There aren't any mirrors. There aren't machines. It's very stripped back. It's very minimal, which resonates with me personally. I love the minimalism of a box and the simplicity of what you need to actually have a great workout and to build a great physique and become strong and fit. But you also have people that genuinely want to see you do well and want to see you achieve things. That is not the case in a public gym. So for me, what's been addictive is actually the friendship.
I think that's something which is you've touched on there, which is very important because, well, there's no doubt that physical exercise can improve your mood. Getting yourself to do it is actually a huge obstacle. Everyone will at some point of their life have experienced that, whether it's training for a marathon or going for a run just to improve your mood after work or before work or whatever it is you're trying to do. I can remember having a coffee on the Lower Richmond Road, which is when we sort of talked about that letter I'd sent you, and you said, come along to the box, come along to this CrossFit gym. Saturday morning is where you work in partners. I had that sort of friend to sort of go with. It wasn't go for a run, go to the gym. And something I heard constantly from the moment I was sort of diagnosed with my mental health condition to really up until this day is someone saying, just go for a little run or get yourself to the gym or to do some physical exercise. But but you need someone to take you with you. I think if had you not taken me with you, I mean, and obviously we made our own arrangements to get to the gym, but if you hadn't been there, I don't think I would have stuck with it. I think something would have pulled me out just as I walked through that door to say, no. I remember telling you I've got my first class, and you came down for it, but you weren't actually training that day because you'd already trained. And just to have you there really took the sting out of doing something new. Because it's a daunting process starting anything new for most people, whether we like to admit it or not. But especially when you have anxiety and you have one eye on the exit at all times, all I'm going to do, basically, if things get bad, is I'm just going to turn to you. But you realise that actually things weren't that bad.
What's fair to say is that as human beings, I think we say a lot of things,
Yeah.
and they do very little. And we're really good at making excuses up in our minds for not doing things. You know, it was a no-brainer for me to be there, to be there on your first day when you were actually coming in. And honestly, it was a privilege to see you in there doing it as well. I mean, going anywhere new is an intimidating environment, regardless of whether you are in the midst or having overcome mental health issues. And so really that was the situation.
So for my background in the military, you do a lot of sport, and then when you leave, it just stops overnight, which obviously isn't great for your physical condition. And I certainly put on quite a lot of weight in a short space of time, but also your mental condition. And as you rightly say, it's not just the structure and the physical exercise you're doing, but that community. I did join a rowing club. I live in Putney, just behind where the rowing clubs are. For some people, they're going to love that, but for me, it was just too complicated. You know, the Cox had sort of said, he'd phoned in sick on the way or something. That means you can take the boat out. So everyone's there, and you're ready to go, and you can't. You've got one important component missing. There were too many moving parts, and it just all went wrong. And people have been rowing since they were 13, sometimes younger. It is a schoolboy sport for the vast majority of people. You're never going to be able to compete with that. Clubs, I think, they push people away in terms of they don't embrace them. They sort of say, well, we've got this guy here, he's rowed at school, he's rowed at university. If you want to start now, you're just going to be behind the curve and never going to be on that level. So you actually put off. The times I actually thought, I don't want to go tonight, because you're just around people who are just sort of snobby, if you will, sort of the physical snobbery of I've rowed for longer, therefore I'm better than you, and you can't compete with that. But with CrossFit, there are people who have done it for years and years, and they are at a level which I can't compete with, and I'm not going to pretend to. But they are so welcoming, and they embrace you so well that it's actually a nice feeling. And I was very anxious the first time I went, and anxious continually sort of each morning before I go. But as soon as you get there, it just floods away. It really does. And I think the difference between doing any physical exercise in the military and even, say, something like British military fitness you see in the park, it's all about beasting yourself. There's a lot of shouting, a lot of screaming. There's no reinforcement of you're doing well or encouragement. It's all don't fall behind the curve or you're going to get yelled at. And for me, sort of with PTSD and anxiety, that actually triggers something that's quite unpleasant. So I was really worried about that with CrossFit. But the CrossFit, I haven't heard anything. I don't know if you ever have. It's always positive. It's always, that's it, keep it up, keep going, that's it, good stuff. So you just feel better about yourself. Obviously, as a podcast, you won't be able to see this, but Justin and I are still in our gym kit from our session this morning. Now we've come straight from the gym, straight from the box.
First and second.
Straight from the box into doing this podcast, because you have that sort of high where you just want to keep it going.
Yeah, I think we're lucky here with District. Battersea,
that's the name of the box.
I've been there, yeah. I've been here for a while, and I know the guys who run it, and been fortunate enough to make some great friends there. But I've also found that when you travel, you go overseas, one of the first things I do, as sad as it sounds, the first thing I do is see where the local box is to where I'm on holiday, because you know that you're going to be welcome there, kind of like a long lost brother. And there are very few places you walk into where people put their hand out and say, hi.
So it's
nice
a bit like
you.
a fraternity.
Yeah, hi, nice to meet you. Of course, there's a couple of things like that you need for entry there. You need a pair of Metcons, you need a pair of stance socks, you need some knee sleeves, which fit better on my arms than they do on my legs, ironically, which is very sad. But you need a couple of things. But you walk in and they're lovely people. They generally, really, generally speaking, they really welcome you. And there's nothing like bringing you together through shared suffering. That's what I've realised, is that nothing builds relationships like shared suffering. And that might be us sharing our feelings on our struggles that we've had. But it might be a physical activity. It might be the rugby for me back in the days until this injury, and now the CrossFit. But there's nothing that brings you together by sharing. One of those big lessons I've learned in recent times is that vulnerability actually brings people together. It doesn't push them away. And I think the big misconception in life, particularly for amongst men, and particularly amongst alpha males, or people who think they're alpha males, is that I can't show that emotion. I don't want to show that. But actually the truth is it just brings people together, and it makes you feel a hell of a lot better about yourself.
Yep.
So there's that element of the community, not just here, but globally there's the CrossFit community. Of course, the positivity, you're absolutely right about positivity. Everyone is super positive. You've got to be a bit careful at times because you're often doing Olympic lifting and other things. You're using a lot of weight, typically, and you want to be a bit careful there to make sure that you don't end up injuring yourself. So positivity, but also just an eye to make sure that you're doing the right thing. Sometimes you see form dropping a little bit when you start doing high-intensity work that, and I'm the first to suffer myself. You start pushing really hard and you come into the barbell thinking to snatch it above the head and suddenly the spine's in all sorts of places it shouldn't be. So that's just an element to be aware of. You can't underestimate the power of accountability in all of this. I've benefited from accountability. I've got this one friend, Mr. Kieran Grealish, who I do hope listens to this interview, who pretty much calls me every Monday morning to check in. Calls me every Monday morning just to say, "Just how you doing? What's the week looking like? How you doing?" That's huge for me. That's been huge. And I thought, well, at least with this, I can hold you accountable to this. If you tell me just, I'm enjoying this, I want to come back next week. Okay, so when are we coming back next week? Let's pencil it in the diary and make sure you come. I'll be here with you. That's really important. Equally, I was open to the fact that this might not work. We were kind of rolling the dice. We didn't know whether this was going to help you or not.
Yep.
Although I do remember years ago, we were stumbling back at about 4 a.m. from a nightclub somewhere in Chelsea. No, that definitely wasn't happening. We'd just been removed. We probably would have just been asked not to come in because the ratio of female to male participants going into that nightclub wasn't right for them. But no, this was probably 3-4 years ago, and I remember you saying, "Hey, just like I've done a bit of CrossFit on the boat." I think you'd done a bit of
on a ship.
Yeah, on a ship. Yeah. On the dinghy.
We did it.
You did a bit of CrossFit, and I remember
a tiny bit. Yeah.
I remember thinking, "Oh, okay, so that's cool." So he's aware of this, and actually, if I suggest it, I think it will go down well.
It doesn't have to be CrossFit, because obviously not everyone's going to have a friend that is a member of a CrossFit box, or necessarily actually will want to get into it, because I know people that aren't interested in that sort of environment, and I think to push yourself into something like that wouldn't necessarily be right for you. Although I am a huge advocate of CrossFit now, but it could be anything. It could be anything, and I think if a friend is comfortable in something that they do and they get enjoyment for, they're able to actually take their friend under their wing and say, "Look, I've had a lot of help from this, a lot of benefit from this. I'll be there to do it with you," and that is literally support. And personally, I felt that there's a misconception that those who are suffering from a mental health condition require sympathy, or that's what people think that they need, but actually they need support. How and what this is will depend on so many different factors, and there isn't a right and wrong answer. I don't think you ever gave me sort of a big pillow and a big cuddle and a squeeze. Like, don't worry, mate. It was just right. Let's go down to the gym. Yeah. And it differs from a friend saying, "Let's go for a beer," because although at times I do enjoy that. I definitely drink a lot less than I used to sometimes, and actually, I leave those situations feeling pretty shit because I've probably had a beer, and that probably doesn't help with my sort of the chemicals inside me, and you're just talking and you're chewing the fat. And if you've had a mental health problem, you don't want to move stuff around. You want to sort of push through, and talking sometimes is helpful, but sometimes it's not actually that beneficial. Whatever you do, it has to be with someone, and that person really is taking the lead on it, which you definitely did. I was very fortunate in my situation, because some of my friends from the military paid for my initial membership, and one of the co-owners down at District, John, he'd also been in the military, and he was very, very welcoming and very supportive, and really went well beyond what I'd expect someone who I'd never met to do, really. He told me it was to helping someone who'd been in the military, but it really shocked me. And I don't know if it shocked you as well, Justin. You can't help but sort of feel loved in that situation, and even by my friends, who, the key guy, a guy called Nick, who's probably one of the fittest guys I know, he's still in the Navy. He was deployed and liaising with people in order to get my membership, which just shows you the support that's there, from certain people. They will go above and beyond.
When it comes to the things that happened afterwards, when you came down and John was incredibly welcoming and really just, I don't think you met him initially. I mean, it took a while before you actually met him. A good couple of weeks in before you even met him, but you'd heard from him via email. And I was even CC'd in some of those email exchanges between a lot of these guys on the ship and John. And all I did was make the introduction, you know. And I think really what we saw follow from that is the best of the human spirit, the best of humanity coming out, where people say, okay, so this is someone who, you know, he's going to benefit from this, and I want to be part of that journey for them. And that's really all it was. I couldn't believe that the guys had stepped up. I think it says a huge amount about who they are as people, the values they hold dear, how much of an impact you had on them, and how much they care for you. That's massive, absolutely massive. Just for them to have stepped up and contributed financially and emotionally and in their time like they did, as well as what John did, and continues to do as well, is really just a tribute to these men as they are.
I think it's very hard not to be humbled by it, because it does restore your faith in humanity. And I think if for anyone that's been through a sort of a time when things go very dark, it can be really hard to actually think there is good out there. And that isn't to sort of play the victim and sort of think people have to drop everything and look after me. It's just that asking for help is always tricky. But then when people step up, it just goes to show that people can offer support in ways that they probably thought wasn't going to make a difference. So a small bit of support can have a huge impact. Ultimately, it's just having that sort of invisible hug, and not just saying it, but actually doing it.
On a very basic level, there wasn't a huge amount of cognition in this. Like, I didn't sit there thinking about this. I didn't strategize about this at all. I just wanted to share what I love with a friend. There's nothing more. Like, really, there's nothing more to say. The byproduct's been fantastic. And what I would like to say is that I'm absolutely not special in any capacity. There's nothing about me that's special, apart from I've been around great people. And I've got a lot of great people around me who've given me a huge amount of support myself. And they have been people that have driven the importance into me of taking action on things. Less talk, more action. You know, that's been really huge for me. Some people don't like that, but I've always been in an environment where you sort of, I can't help but think of some of the business settings I've been in, startup environments, or quite frankly, just working by yourself. You know, I've worked by myself now, and you think, and thankfully, a lot of these other guys who are around me, guys and girls, have also been environments where they've created things themselves. And if they don't take action on things, then they will no longer have a business. They will no longer have a job. So I have started thinking, okay, so life is really about taking action on things. And I think I've also become acutely aware as I've got older. I mean, we're only 30, but acutely aware of our mortality and the importance of taking action. And I don't want to be someone who doesn't do those things. I want to do those things and then turn around and say, I tried and it didn't work.
Yeah.
So really, it's a culmination of those factors that have played into this for us and for me and the way I view this.
What was your conception of mental health and what people go through? Before I told you about what I'd gone through, were you aware that people do attempt to take their lives, or did you not really have a reason to think about it?
I think fundamentally, just hearing you sort of position it like that, I can't help but think, you know, people always say, come up to you like, how you doing? You know, how are you, man? Or good to see you, good to see how you doing. Psychologically, I remember
People
hearing
normally
a Harvard
answer fine.
Yeah, I remember a Harvard University psychologist saying, "Oh, the last thing that anyone wants to hear is for you to say I'm not that well, or that I've got a problem, or today's not been that great." The last thing they want, and then they'll kind of switch off.
So it's a bullshit question.
Yeah, it's a bullshit question. They'll instantly switch off, and then the conversation is like dead in the water. So I've always been aware of it. I've always been really curious by it as well. Just really been curious about it. I used to sit there as a sort of, I mean, I was an underachiever in every respect, academically at school. But for one reason or another, I found it fascinating to sit there and listen to TED Talks or read books around psychology and mindset and people. And so I've always been really curious and aware about it. I think I had a couple of people close to me in my family, maybe. I think it was, certainly in my family who've suffered, who have become, who've been directed to medications of various sorts. I then had two independent friends, probably a year, 2 years between them, who I grew up with, both come to me and myself and maybe others at the same time and share that they had considered it and certainly in both cases actually attempted suicide as well. And so in some ways I'd become, you were the third actually. And so I I had in some ways become quite aware of it, quite acutely aware of it. In myself, I'd always been someone who had beaten themselves up a huge amount, beaten themselves up a lot about not being good enough.
So it's self-critical.
It's hugely self-critical, and I think a lot of men are. I think a lot of men are. A lot of the men that are.
What do you think causes that?
I think there's a genetic element to it. I think we have a view of ourselves wanting to be dominant in what we do. Going back to the alpha male, from a historical perspective, we grew up in environments where we had to be dominant to survive, and that's still inherent in us. Yuval Harari in *Sapiens* talks about us operating on a system that is so old in our minds that it just isn't suited to the environment we live in right now. So we become incredibly brutal on ourselves. One of my heroes, and probably the only guy I idolise, and someone who I got no interest in celebrity whatsoever, but Johnny Wilkinson is a guy who has suffered a huge amount himself from mental illness. In his book, Tackling Life, says it all. And I was always fascinated by him, and he was a high achiever. He was someone who externally had everything that you could ask for: great looking, elite performance, great athlete, making a lot of money, traveling the world, all of the things that would be a metric of success, but yet still struggling with his own mind. So I quickly became aware that ultimate success in life is about being able to silence the mind, being able to be okay within yourself.
Yeah.
Still, that's where I've always wanted to be. And so I've always been aware of it, Jim. I've always been aware of it.
Do you think there's a shift in say, our generation to our parents' generation, or perhaps people sort of in between, who think differently about mental health?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Why do you think people think differently about it now than they used to?
I think it's unfair to say that mental health or vegan food or whatever is having a moment, because it should always have had a moment. It should have always been an important thing, but for one reason or another, it never was. Our parents' generation are very, very good at snuffing it out, pretending it doesn't exist. And I'm a big believer now that if you bottle these things up, then it doesn't get sorted. You have to be able to share these things, and they're only shared are they then sorted, or in any, maybe not sorted, but
Managed.
Move forward on. And I see it with my parents. I mean, my ma, she kind of is my hero, I guess, aside from Johnny. And but she's very direct. The idea of mental health being a problem is like, pull up your socks. That term I hate, which you've referenced earlier today. Man up. Like, she wouldn't say that, but it was insinuated.
You
by
think
the way,
she'd think it?
Yeah, and comes from a very strong Afrikaans background.
Yeah.
Let's front up, and let's get this done. And to an extent, I see that and I get that, but not in everything. I had a coffee with a great friend of ours the other day who shared with me that he had found his calling in life. He's doing what he wants to do. He's traveling the world. He's writing for some of the finest publications in the world, freelance, from his laptop, and he's traveling the world. He's trying to see every country in the world, and he's overtly just the happiest he's ever been. It's obvious when you meet him, he's the happiest he's ever been. But his family, have not been able to see that. His family have not been able to share his joy because they're like, why aren't you sitting at the desk? Why aren't you sitting at that in that big corporation, working up the ladder, getting married, having children? Like, they can't understand that. So I think there's a huge difference in mindset around these things.
So we face pressures from our parents, from our bosses, from our friends,
From ourselves, most
from
importantly.
ourselves.
Yeah.
I think that's a very interesting point. So what do you think, and this is the $1 million question, what do you think we can do then to not face that internal saboteur that we often are aware perhaps is there, perhaps more than ever, but still not able to actually defeat?
I mean, that's tough. I think we're all different, and one thing that works for someone is not going to work for another. But I do believe that you should attempt, where possible, to live into this idea of being curious, looking up. Being able to look up. Dr. Robin Sharma, the author of The Monk Who Sold Us Ferrari, used to say, you're walking on a diamond path, don't forget to look around you. There's stuff down below, there's stuff up above, there's the side, there's amazing things happening all around you. Don't forget that, and don't be afraid to, be aware of that and enjoy it. So really being able to soak up the everyday, the mundane, be really open to the idea of learning from other people and reading and being curious. All of these things are fundamental, I think. And what that then does is when you're open to these things, you then attract other people towards you who are also curious and interested. And as a result, you then build these frameworks around you that help you become more aware of your blind spots, things that you're not good at, the areas that you could be you could be more considerate and loving to yourself about. God knows how many times I've beaten myself up about not being good enough for things. And you suddenly get to this point in your life where you're like, why am I hurting myself so much about this stuff? Does it really matter? I'm the one that persecutes myself. I used to think to myself, no one is worrying about the job that I do. No one thinks about you when it's 7:20 and you're sitting on the Northern Line. No one's thinking about you. They're thinking about themselves. The quicker you understand that, the quicker you get to the point of being able to live a life that's more authentic to yourself. And Christ, I think of Steve Jobs, a good example. I mean, of course, you can talk about all elements of the man. It wasn't great in so many ways. But the one thing he said in that speech, commencement speech at Stanford, was, don't get caught in the dogma of living someone else's life. Why are we so caught up in this? Why would we take that job that wasn't right for us? Why would we get in that relationship that we thought was the one that we should get in, that our parents thought was right for us, that we knew in our heart of hearts wasn't right? We should live somewhere that's the right thing to do. We should have friends and be seated at the clubs with a bottle of champagne in the right, or driving that car, or posting that social post that makes us look like the nuts. I mean,
this is you describing your life.
Well, yeah, last couple of days was. Yeah. but your answer, your question really was, what can you do to actually try and help these things? I think number one, be open, therefore create environments and people around you that are going to help you live a more humble, more focused on important life. Less about the external, but much more about the internal. And I do believe, again, like I said, on the sort of the day-to-day structures, putting the structures in place that give you the best chance of winning. As much as that's not the outcome, the ultimate goal, it means that you're able to say, okay, so if I do these things today, which are the things I control, not things that I can't control, but the things I can control, if I can get them done today, then that today's going to have been a good day for me. And suddenly these things start to spiral. It starts to, like, one better day leads to a slightly better day, and then the next day is even better. So it's kind of a spiral to those things. And I think fundamentally training, awareness, a gratitude play a huge role in all of these things. Oh God, I can't over-egg the importance of gratitude. We are so quick to say, I will be happy when I get this. That guy on Instagram with Dan Bazillion with 17 topless models around him in a swimming pool in Mexico. That's, I'm going to be happy when I get there.
That's the goal.
I'm going to be happy when I get there. No. You should be happy, or try to, or to be aware of what you have right now. Right now, we're sitting on a balcony in South West London, having some grapes in front of us, some Marks and Spencers, some booch from Johnny Wilkinson's kombucha from Sainsbury's, with a great friend, getting fired up talking about life and all the good things and the sad things, the dark things. They all contribute to this journey we're on. Openness, being around people, movement, gratitude. These are the foundations to actually trying to manage the mind and have a happier, more positive life.
If you haven't probably realised already, Justin is an incredibly passionate person who is actually quite infectious. Definitely, I've noticed when we've gone to friends for dinner and stuff, there can be a very dry or dull moment, or talking about something quite simple, and there will be a comment which will uplift it. So there's a chap I spoke to who runs an organisation called Rock to Recovery. He himself was a former Marine. I think it was about 18 years he served, and he was discharged with PTSD. And I went to see him, and I remember sort of feeling straight away when I was talking to him embarrassed, because he'd been in for 18 years and I'd been in for 6. Our careers were completely different, and I felt, which I think is a common misconception, unworthy of what I had been diagnosed with or perhaps going through. He said something which stuck with me a lot, and it's that a lot of us live our lives looking in the rearview mirror. We are yet to be the best version of ourselves. That is always in the future, or you should always think it is. When we look at mental health, we think people have gone through difficult stuff all their lives, and it has never always been a problem for them. So why is it sort of coming out now? But it has always been there in underlying issues, and people deal with it in alcohol or domestic abuse, or they actually live quite limited lives in terms of what they're capable of living, because they close off.
I'll never forget, actually, at school, I for one reason or another, I can't even remember what the problem was, but I remember feeling just low about something at one point or another. And I was genuinely surprised with the person that stepped up to come out and actually try and, sort of support me and ask how I was doing and share and give me space to invent that. And I've never forgotten that time
Yeah.
because I expected maybe that others would
Yeah.
come out, and they didn't. And I really was surprised by it. So I sort of promised myself there and then that I would always make it a priority to support those that I really care about.
For anyone that's gone through anything from a range of perhaps just feeling low to perhaps, in my situation when you attempt to take your own life, you do realise one thing, and it isn't. I wouldn't recommend this as a way to find this out, but as a silver lining, you really find out who your friends are, and I think that surprised me as well because if I'm honest, I wouldn't have expected you to perhaps be as helpful as you have been. You could have quite easily have sent me a nice message back and then just slipped under the radar. But you did step up. You stepped up in ways which I sort of didn't really expect you to, if I'm honest. I sent a group of my friends an email about what had happened because I didn't like the idea of people perhaps knowing half the story. And again, it's a bit of sort of paranoia. I wanted to tell everyone like this has happened. I was going through the military. I had some tough times. I was medically discharged, and then I fell off a cliff and attempted to take my own life. And the response I got was incredible, and I hadn't really expected to get a response. It was more sort of just so people wouldn't be in any doubt. Another friend of mine actually caught the train from London, where he worked, back to my parents' house near Gatwick, where I was staying at the time. And we just went for a walk, and he just sort of explained that his sister had gone through something similar, and that feeling of that, so that invisible hug, because I don't think guys like giving each other hugs, and I know you don't want to like cry into their arms in a sort of wet way, but you do need that sort of mental hug, and that just comes out amazingly in situations like that. You sort of do think, I am in my own, no one else has thought like this before, there's something wrong, there's something really wrong with me, and I've let everyone down. A lot of people think with mental health that it's like you're fixed, but it isn't as simple as plugging in a phone and just letting it recharge and then you're good to go. You're constantly managing it, but the support that just a friend can just give to someone and just say, look, you don't need to tell me everything, but let's just do this, and I'll be there with you, and it would just be me and you. When I first started CrossFit, I didn't know anyone, and I know not very many people, definitely not by name, only by face, but the difference from when I first started, where I was probably quite timid and drawn in, has already changed. And yesterday, I ripped my shirt off, and I was boom, and I was, because it was that's, you felt comfortable. You were amongst people who were pushing themselves to the point. And
it's funny. It's almost like a microcosm of life, because no one's actually looking at you either when they're working out.
They're really
people
not,
think, oh, I'm not lifting enough. I'm not doing it fast enough. I'm not whatever. Or if you happen to have your shirt off, or a girl's wearing, I know they become self-conscious with sort of crop tops on or short shorts, whatever. Reality is that no one's even looking at them, because they're so closed in on their own worlds. It's a really good example, actually, a good example.
You get sucked into that.
Yeah, you get sucked in.
What would you say to someone who sort of thought, I want to go to CrossFit, but I think it's a bit of a cult. I think everyone there's a bit weird. I'm not sure about it. And at the moment, they're just like, I'd rather go to the gym where I can put headphones on and just...
Yeah, I think it's a valid concern, and I was more concerned actually about the financial, because it's bloody expensive. I was worried. A friend of mine, my oldest pal, Jay, in the States, he said this is something you should look at to try and get yourself back into a community environment and a competitive environment if you wanted after this injury.
Post-rugby injury.
Yeah, and he said you should try it, and I tried it, but I was apprehensive because it was just so expensive. And the only way to do it is you can go along for free trials to these places. Just go along. Just go in and see. There are more and more of them in the UK now. And you'll also get a similar vibe, I think, in other types of group training environments. There's a couple of other competitors to CrossFit, like your F45s or your Orange Theories. I've never been to those things, but I'd imagine that it's not dissimilar to that. I can only talk from my experience in a CrossFit environment.
Yeah.
The only way to do it is just go along and
Just
actually
to go
try
along.
it. Yeah. I'm 10 times better. I mean, I'm still not. I'm not Michael Phelps, Michael Johnson or whatever, but I'm a much better athlete now. Yet. I'm far leaner, far more dynamic. You get challenged in ways that you never thought you would. I mean, you go into a public gym, all I cared about was my bench and my deadlift.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. But then where do you go from now? Like, okay, so I'm going to try and incrementally increase over a period of time. That's fine as well. But it's just a bit dull. Whereas I go into a box now every time and I'm humbled, because I can't do something, or I'm not able to do it as to the level that I want to, and that's always going to be a great incentive for you to keep coming back and doing more. That's what's really special, I think, about CrossFit. I think it's really important as well to say that most people, I think a lot of people would not have been subject to this in their lives, where they have not had a friend or a family member come to them and tell them that they're in a situation like this.
Yeah.
And men are really bad at speaking about things, they really are bad about speaking about these things, and they don't want to talk about it. So it's actually really hard to know what to do. It is actually on the other side of it, where I was sat, where I am sitting still, I still find it, it's not easy to know what to do. And you've experienced it firsthand. Like, some people have been awkward, some people haven't said anything, some people have said too much. I never felt like I was doing too much or too little. I've always felt fine. I definitely didn't want to treat you any differently. That's all I cared about, was I don't want to treat you any differently. But it's really, really difficult being on the other side. And the point that we talked about earlier before we started recording was, how do you know when just a couple of bad days means that I'm in trouble? Or how about my friend at work? How about they've had a couple of bad days or a couple of bad weeks or months? How do I know that, where does it turn from just being a bad couple of days to suddenly I have a problem, or they have a problem that they need to manage, like a broken leg or an ACL injury? That's the crucial part for me, and I think it's really challenging for people to understand that.
A lot of people listening might automatically think I know someone that has gone through a mental health problem. They might think I'm going through a mental health problem myself, or they might think I'm not affected at all. And I was definitely in the category, I'm not affected at all. And when mental health was first mentioned as a possible problem for me, I almost just sort of just disregarded and walked out. Because it's a pride issue. For me, mental health sounded woolly and non-scientific. The key thing for knowing when something is different from just being depressed or stressed or anxious in a short term, because those are completely natural things that everyone's experienced, is if that is relevant to the situation you're going through. So is it a reasonable response? It isn't easy sort of going into a GP or a mental health clinic and saying, I can't function how I used to without breaking down or having a panic attack or whenever this is. And it really will depend on each person. I think the only key bit of advice I'd give is don't self-diagnose. And what I mean by that is, don't think you do have a problem, but also don't think that you don't have a problem. If you have symptoms that are concerning you, go to your GP or speak to a doctor or nurse, someone that is trained to recognise that, and they'll be able to tell you whether it is or isn't a big problem. If you tell a friend or a colleague or a family member who isn't trained, they will just do what they think is best. And again, it doesn't come from a bad place necessarily, but it won't be the right information that you need. And a lot of people in my work were saying, you just need to man up. This isn't mental health. This is just you being weak, and you take that on board. It won't change overnight, that stigma, but you need to focus on you. And if you are having something you think is wrong, or you see it in a friend that something you think is wrong, I think it is vitally important that you get help sooner rather than later, because it is completely manageable. Those of you that are interested in taking up CrossFit, please contact one in your local area for an introduction. Many of them run programs for people that have never done it before. For anyone living in southwest London, please search for District CrossFit. I guarantee you will not be disappointed, and you will love the atmosphere down there. Justin, thank you very much for your time, and thank you for introducing me to CrossFit and for giving me your support.
Jimbo, an absolute pleasure, by the way. Can't wait to listen to the next to come.
If you're ever in a crisis, please visit your local A&E or make an emergency appointment with your GP. You don't have to tell them what it is for. But please, don't suffer alone.